everyone. My name is Andrea, and I'm here from Postman telling you about APIs as well as a technology called Postman. Let's get started. So my name is Andrea. I'm a student community manager here at Postman. The best way to reach me is my email right here, andrea.chen@postman.com. Feel free to email me with anything, content, questions, anything you learn about APIs. My inbox is always open. So let's talk a little bit about our agenda. First, we're going to talk about APIs and Postman. Then we're going to break down requests and responses. Then we're going to actually try things out and give you some hands-on experience using Postman and the knowledge that you learned about APIs. And then finally, we have follow-up resources we would like to share. And then we have a time for questions and answers before we close. All right, so let's talk about APIs as if they were a digital restaurant. When you go to a restaurant, you tell the waiter what you want to order. The waiter then goes to the kitchen and gets the food. The kitchen gets the food back to the waiter, and then the waiter brings the food out to you. In this situation, you can kind of see that it mimics a client API server relationship. The API is the waiter, the client is you making the request, and the server is the kitchen giving back the request. In this situation, you see that as the client, you don't necessarily know what happened between the API and the server, but you know that if you talk to the API, you'll get the request that you have made. So what is an API and why should you use one? API stands for Application Programming Interfaces. They allow services to communicate with each other. Software has become more complex and collaborative over the years. Developers no longer need to create every service from scratch. APIs allow developers to access data from a service like Google or Twitter without any knowledge of how the code base has been implemented. This means that if you have a really cool idea for how you want to use Twitter, you don't necessarily need to know how Twitter works to be able to tweet. You just have to call the Twitter API, and the Twitter API will tweet for you, meaning you can build your awesome, cool idea. Now we're going to talk about APIs in a bit more technical sense. Sorry, my cat. So billions of people own smartphones and use them to share photos on social networks. This wouldn't be possible without APIs. Sharing photos using a mobile social networking application involves a different type of APIs. First, to take the photo, the social networking application uses a smartphone camera via its APIs. Then through the API, it can use some image library embedded in the application and invert the photo's colors. And eventually, it shares the modified photo by sending it to a server application hosted on a social network server using a remote API accessible via a network, usually the internet. So in this scenario, 3 different types of APIs are involved: a hardware API, a library, and a remote API. As you can see, you don't necessarily need to build a camera, but if you can access the camera API, you can use the functions of the camera API to bring back the data that you were looking for in your application. So there's an API for everything. This is just a small list of APIs. Are there any APIs here that y'all really like or would like to learn more about? I personally think the weather API is really cool. If there's APIs that you like, feel free to drop them in chat and we can share that API resource with each other. Spotify is another popular one. Twitter is always really fun. One of my favorite APIs uses the Twitter API to create little images of constellations. So APIs turn software into Lego bricks. How many of y'all actually played with Lego bricks as a child? Who likes Lego bricks? So with Lego bricks, similar to how Lego bricks, you could build things. APIs allow you to do that with software. With Lego bricks, you could use the bricks to build whatever you want, whether they were cars, planes, spaceships, or whatever else you could imagine. With APIs, you can now break down software into reusable code chunks that allow you to turn your ideas into other things. Who knows what you can do when you compose a bunch of APIs together? What happens if you make Twitter API and YouTube API? Maybe you can make a really cool application with the Spotify or the Discord API. APIs allow you to reuse code chunks into different formats, and that means you can build a whole bunch of different things, and that's really cool. So what is Postman? Postman is a collaborative API development platform that simplifies creating, using, and testing APIs with the UI. 98% of Fortune 500 organizations use Postman. This is just a small list of a few. PayPal, Uber, Walt Disney all use Postman. As you can see, Postman is a global industry standard, and we're super excited to share this resource with you and have you learn more about this technology. So before Postman, how you'd work with APIs would typically be to call the command line and make the request. But now with Postman, as you can see, we have this beautiful UI, and we'd love to have you learn more about it, as well as to get to use it in our next sections. So now that we've talked about what an API is, let's talk about requesting and receiving data with an API. So a client is an entity that makes a request to a server. Some examples of clients are applications like web browser. A server controls resources and services. An API is the interface that exposes these resources and services to clients in a network. The client can interact with an API by making requests over the network to the API. The API will then evaluate the request, perform the required operations, maybe interact with the database or other APIs, and send them back as a response to the client. Postman is a client that allows you to make requests and responses and view responses from servers. As you can see, the client makes the request to the server, and the server returns the response back to the client. The API is handling all of that, so that way you as a client are able to request what you want and get the response that you are looking for. How do you make requests? Well, requests are how we're going to communicate with APIs. You need three things to make an API request: the method, the URL, and a path. These elements let the API know what kind of request you're making and where to send the request. So let's talk about methods and endpoints. When we make a request to an API, we specify what we want to get out of this interaction with an HTTP method. Methods are like verbs, they're actions. They let the client, like Postman, know which action to use for the URL. There's lots of methods out there, but the ones we'll be used today and the most commonly used ones are get, which is how we can receive information; post, when we send information back to the API; put and patch is how we update information; and delete is when we delete the information and remove it from the API. In Postman, the first default method is get. If you click the arrow pointing up, you can see the rest of the methods. Put versus patch, they sound similar, but patch will update partial data of a record, where put are designed to completely overwrite the existing data for a record. In addition to a method, API request requires an endpoint. An endpoint includes a URL with the path, the protocol, the host, as well as the path to determine where you would like to call the API. So this is the requests and endpoints for the API. As you can see, we have our API methods here on Postman and the path that we'd like the API request to come from. But now let's talk a little bit more about the details of this. So when you make an API with a get method, you will usually receive everything from the URL address. This can be pretty overwhelming. Parameters specified to filter out the response you're looking for, so you can get the specific data that you want. Next up are authorization methods. Since this is a 101 session, we won't go over the full details of authorization. In general, authentication lets the API know what permissions the client has and determines what data can be requested. This typically starts out with verifying the developer and the user. One of the most common types of authorization you'll see, and the ones we will use today, is an API key. Other forms of authentication include access tokens, client ID, or client secret keys. Finally, we have headers. Headers are metadata for the request. Some APIs require you to send particular headers that are not shown in the URL, unlike how parameters show the key value pair. It's common practice to send some authorization data like access tokens and such in the header. Finally, we have the body. This is mainly used to post or put methods where you need to specify the data that you're looking to add in JSON. This is the body, and usually, often when you send the data to the client, you'll be using JSON, but other types of data types will be accepted when you post to the API. As you can see, here's a sample of JSON data. JSON uses key value pairing, so the key being name and the value being Jane Doe, to kind of enter the data. When we receive responses, so we sent over our API requests and sent them over Postman. When you send an API call, you will also receive a response. This includes status codes like 200, 400. Are there any status codes that y'all know? Feel free to drop it as a comment in the chat. I think there's a popular one that everyone should know: 404 not found. So that's an API status code. These will let us know how our API call went, to verify how the process went. So 404 not found means that our API request, for whatever reason, was not able to retrieve any data. I'm going to show you this in the Postman application. So for example, here I have the New York Times API. Um, let me fix my window. So here is just a simple New York Times application. Uh, so this is the New York Times application. As you can see here, I made my request. I'm asking for hardcover books. I'll send my request and I get my request back. So this is the data that the API has returned back to me. It returns in a JSON format, and here's the status that Postman has given me, status 200, as well as the time it took for the API request to be made, and the response to be returned, 944 milliseconds, which is really fast. This time helps us to determine performance issues for latency to see if there's anything that's improving the process or what we need to be doing to make sure it's a pretty smooth runtime. Our status for this one was 200, and that's just a sample of a call of an API in Postman. So now let's actually break down and work on using Postman for the workshop. So this is now the workshop portion of the presentation. I'm going to share a link so that y'all can follow along and actually try this yourself. Let's see. I see comments from YouTube. Ollie, if you're watching the stream, could you share the URL for the script foundation? Thank you. So the comments for the link has been shared. Please feel free to join us if you would like to follow along as I do the workshop. So now that we've been talking about APIs, let's actually use Postman and start working with APIs. I think the best way to learn something is always to interact with it hands-on, and so this is a great opportunity to learn more about APIs as well as to use Postman if you haven't used it before. So for today, we'll be practicing things like making a get to the API, receiving a request, as well as posting data and adding to the API. As well as if you want, you can also modify the API. The first step that we need to do is when you are here on the screen, you need to fork the API collection. So we'll go right here, we'll create a fork, label your fork however you want. I'm just going to label it Andrea API, put it in my collection of API literacy. What I mean by that is, so here in your workspace, you want to create a workspace so your collection can live here. If you don't have a workspace, feel free to create one. Let's just create one API 101 with Hacktober hacks. We'll create that workspace. So now that workspace exists. Once again, going back to the Postman workspace to fork the collections. What forking does is allows me to make a copy of this file for my own version. Cool. So now I have this collection right here. So there's a lot happening. How's everyone feeling? Has everyone seen what Postman looks like? If you haven't, a great place to kind of get started with Postman is to review the documentation. So here we have the documentation that explains kind of what this API and this collection does. So just like I was saying, APIs involve methods, endpoints, and paths. So this is the URL that we will be using for this API. So we need this link to be able to tell the API request where we need to go. So let's copy that request, as well as here are paths that we can see. We have quote, joke, and book to work with different APIs. And all of these paths can handle these requests, the get, post, put, and delete. API documentation is how we know what APIs can do. So this API is telling us that these methods are valid. If we use any other API methods, those methods may not necessarily work because that API has not been designed for that. We now know a little bit more about how the API works. We can use the get request to retrieve information, post request to add our own information, put to update our information, and delete the information we've added. We'll be using the jokes API for this first part. Let's first look at what jokes we have here. So we need to add the URL here. Does anyone know what the URL is? Well, if we review the documentation, the URL is going to be postmanstudent.heroku.app. Let's see what happens when we just send this request. We get a hello world, which means our request worked and we got the response that the API wanted to give us with this call. But we want to work with the jokes API. So let's add jokes as our path. Let's make that request. I'm getting an error here. Any reasons why? Is because I use the wrong path. So if we don't make the right path, the API doesn't necessarily know how to complete that request. I said jokes because I thought there'd be multiple jokes, but the API is asking for a joke. So now we actually get a proper API response here. We see the status and the time, and we get a joke back. Now let's also all of this will be visible here. So these are some of the jokes we're seeing. The joke that I got back, joke 1, what is hardware? A part of the computer software which you can kick, is actually right here. So as you can see, this is the visualizer we have for the jokes on the website, and we're getting them back through our API responses right now. So now that we have some data coming back, let's actually post some data. Let's add to this jokes collection. Anyone have any funny joke that they'd like to share with us about APIs or software that they want to add to the collection? So let's see. So because the data returned us as JSON, that means for us, we'll also have to write our data as JSON to post the data. So to do that, we go into our body, raw text, select JSON, and now let's start writing that body. So as you can see, some of the fields that we need are ID. ID can be really just whatever number you'd like to pick. 0 through 3 are taken, so let me do 5, 4. And then let's add another field, author, if you want to credit it. And then a joke. So does anyone have any jokes that they'd like to share? Okay. I think a fun joke is why did the astronaut want to go to space? To become a okay, here's this. This is a bad joke. But we will tell you what you can do with bad jokes. But I'm going to share this bad joke with you. Don't come for me. It's okay if you don't laugh. Why did the astronaut make an API request? Answer. to become a postman. Ha ha ha. And then finally, we need a source. If we look at our documentation, source is actually a optional field, so we don't necessarily need to add it. But I like to take credit for it, so I'm gonna say me. And that way, when the joke is bad, y'all know where it came from. So let's send this request. It was successful, status 201 created. So instead of status 200, where it was okay, status 201 tells us that the API the post data that we made has been created and added into our jokes API. So let's refresh this. And then look, my API, my joke is right here. So I'm gonna give y'all a minute or two to help me add to this API. I'd love to see more jokes in here, and as jokes are being made, they will be added in real time right here. So add a joke to the API. So add a joke to this website by making a post to the API request. What joke are you gonna add to our shared collaborative joke API? All right. Is anyone working on adding jokes? Does anyone need any bad jokes to add? Let me know in your comments what everyone's doing. Is anyone lost? This is definitely an interactive workshop, so I would love to make sure that you understand Postman as well as be able to add a post and a joke to our shared API. All right. It's okay. Jokes are hard to think of. This is how we get bad jokes. But because we don't really like the joke, we actually can remove it. So let's change your method right here, delete. And we have to select which joke we'd like to remove. What happens if we send this request? So it's telling us right here, the idea is missing or invalid. This is a bad request. So nothing was deleted and the API request did not work. Let's review the documentation one more time. To delete a joke, we need the joke and the ID of the joke. Do we know the ID of the joke that I made? We do. It is 4. So let's send that request. And then the joke with ID 4 is deleted. Status 200 okay, showing that it worked this time. And let's review the website. And now the joke is gone. And then we have a joke here from Ali. I'm a full stack developer. I pull code from the internet. Yeah, that's kind of the software development process. All right, and that is pretty much some of the sample methods. So in this workshop, we learned how to get information using it. We learned how to get information from an API using the get method, as well as how to add information using the post method. And finally, we learned how to delete information from the API using the delete method. These are just a sample of methods that we can use with Postman. As you can see, there's a wide variety, but our API is really simple. So it only needs 3 or 4 methods right now. But isn't it cool to be able to get information back, to also be able to add information and to delete information? This is just a small taste of what APIs truly can do. All right, with that, let's go back to our presentation. That's the workshop portion. Any questions? One need any runner over how Postman works or making requests or using Postman? All right. I'll take the resounding enthusiasm as a let's continue on. Okay. So to recap, we had to use API methods, addresses, parameters. We didn't necessarily use authorization today, but we had to use body data in order to be able to post information to the API. And it was a pretty fun API. We got to share jokes as well as to see how we can make those API requests to get the information we want, as well as to add to the API. But just because this workshop is almost over doesn't necessarily mean your learning has a student has to end. Here at Postman, we have this program called Student Expert. The Student Expert certification indicates you are proficient in essential skills involved in building and testing API requests in Postman, including sending more sophisticated requests in Postman, editing documentation for a collection, writing basic text scripts, running collections, passing data between requests, and scripting request execution order. You have the option to continue with Postman to also become a student leader in your community with access to exclusive events, opportunities like our Postman Student Summit, talks with our CEO, and whatever resources we have for you as a company, from resume reviews to practice interviews, to help you really continue your learning as a student and as a future professional in this industry. The Postman Student Expert is a great way to also show industry and employers that you know about Postman. As we've mentioned before, Postman is used by 98% of Fortune 500 companies. There's a high chance that you will be using Postman in your work as a software engineer, and we'd love for you to show employers already that you are already certified by Postman and you already actually have all the skill sets. So check out our Postman Student Expert program here, apply here to get started and to learn more and to get your certification. And when you're ready for it, join our Postman Student Leader program, where you'll be a leader on campus and help other students learn more about APIs. There's also the chance to win amazing swag here today. For 24 hours, this will be open, and I'm going to share the link with the organizers, but we are going to create a public workspace with a collection of your choice on postman.com. If you send it to us, we'll send you cool swag to the coolest project. I'm going to share the link with the organizers, and the organizers will then share it with you. But if you send us your collection using Postman, we'll send you swag as a thank you, and that we're super proud that you are continued learning with us. Be sure to stay connected with us on our social media. We always love seeing students learn. We have our Twitter and our LinkedIn, #PostmanStudent. We have resources here for you to continue learning more about Postman as well as APIs. Learning.postman.com is our learning center. Explore.postman.com is our API network. And community.postman.com is our forum. So there's always someone available and active in our community and social. Finally, we have our questions and answers. Are there any questions and answers I can help answer today over anything I went through? Feel free to definitely drop a comment in the YouTube. I am looking at the chat. All right. With that being said, thank you so much for coming to our workshop. We're super excited to have you here this morning with us. Let us know how I did and how we did to tell you about Postman, as well as what did you learn here at this workshop. I'm going to share this Google form workshop link with y'all, and the organizers will share it too. If you need anything from me, my email is right here, andrea.chen@postman.com. That's all I have. Thank you so much for tuning in, and super excited to see what you build, test, and learn about APIs with Postman, and how you continue to use technology. All right, that's it from me. I'm going to stop my camera and stop sharing. I'll be here for a bit. Let me know if there's anything you need.